This line shows the times when other GPs' patients died. This is Harold Shipman's pattern. Here you can see a phenomenal number of his patients died between 1 and 5 p.m. Dr. Shipman liked to administer death in the afternoon.
Harold Frederick Shipman was born on January 14, 1946, in the Bestwood Estate, a council housing area in Nottingham. He was the second of 3 siblings. His father, also named Harold Frederick Shipman, 1914 to 1985, worked as a lorry driver, and his mother, Vera, née Britton, 1919 to 1963, was a devout Methodist, as were his working-class parents. Shipman had a close relationship with his mother, who passed away from lung cancer when he was 17 years old. Her death resembled the method Shipman would later use himself. During the final stages of her illness, a doctor administered morphine at home, which eased her pain until she died on June 21, 1963. On November 5, 1966, Shipman married Primrose May Oxtoby, and they had 4 children together. He pursued medical studies at the Leeds School of Medicine, University of Leeds, and graduated in 1970. Shipman started his career at Pontefract General Infirmary in Pontefract, West Riding of Yorkshire, and in 1974 he took his first role as a general practitioner (GP) at the Abraham Ormerod Medical Centre in Todmorden. The next year, Shipman was caught forging prescriptions for pethidine for his personal use. He was fined £600, which is equivalent to £6,357 in 2023, and briefly attended a drug rehabilitation clinic in York. In 1977, he worked as a GP at Donnybrook Medical Centre in Hyde, Greater Manchester. Shipman continued his work as a GP in Hyde throughout the 1980s and opened his own practice at 21 Market Street in 1993, becoming a well-regarded member of the community. In 1983, he was featured in an episode of the Granada television current affairs program World in Action, discussing how mentally ill patients should be treated within the community. He exploited the enormous power he held over his patients to victimize them. Over the course of more than 2 decades, he murdered hundreds of people, not for money, not for revenge, but simply because he could. For years, he was able to get away with it by hiding behind the respect and authority of his profession. Grieving relatives were reassured that their loved ones had died of natural causes. No autopsies were needed, no questions were asked. What made his crimes especially insidious was that he wasn't killing strangers. He was beloved by his patients. They welcomed him into their homes. They trusted him completely. They willingly rolled up their sleeves to receive injections that would end their lives. His victims were among the most vulnerable members of society, elderly women, many of whom lived alone. Only after he was finally caught did people begin to grasp the true scale of what he had done. On June 24, 1998, the sudden death of 81-year-old Kathleen Grundy shocked the town of Hyde, a typical English town about 15 kilometers east of Manchester. Grundy was a well-known and respected figure. Her late husband had served as the town's mayor, and she herself had spent decades involved in local government and charity work. Despite her advanced age, she was active, healthy, and independent. Most people eventually accepted her death. After all, elderly people sometimes die suddenly without obvious warning. But her daughter, Angela Woodruff, wasn't convinced. The first red flag was Kathleen Grundy's will. It had been changed shortly before her death, leaving her entire estate, worth around £400,000 at the time, to her doctor instead of her family. Angela Woodruff, a solicitor who had handled her mother's legal affairs for years, immediately suspected forgery. She went to the police. The investigation raised serious concerns almost immediately. The signature on the will didn't match known samples of Grundy's handwriting. The 2 witnesses admitted They hadn't seen her sign anything at all. They didn't even know her. They were simply fellow patients who believed they were signing a routine medical form. Police were convinced the will was fraudulent, and the obvious suspect was the doctor himself. Given the sudden nature of Grundy's death and the financial motive, investigators began to consider a far darker possibility. Police made the difficult decision to exhume Kathleen Grundy's body 1 month after her burial. The autopsy revealed no obvious cause of death, no heart attack, no stroke, no injuries. Tissue samples were sent for toxicology testing. A month later, the results came back. Kathleen Grundy had died from a fatal dose of morphine. The explanation offered that she was a secret drug addict collapsed almost instantly. Medical records supporting the claim were found to have been altered after her death. In September 1998, the doctor was arrested on suspicion of murder. At first, it seemed like a straightforward case, a doctor killing an elderly woman to steal her money. But police soon realized this was only the beginning. Taxi drivers, undertakers, and former patients came forward with disturbing stories. An unusually high number of his patients had died suddenly. Many were found seated, fully dressed, with sleeves rolled up. In many cases, the doctor himself had been the last person to see them alive, and he always signed the death certificate. Between September and December 1998, 12 more bodies were exhumed. In every case, toxicology revealed lethal doses of morphine. The pattern was unmistakable. Elderly women living alone, long-time patients, house calls that raised no suspicion. Families were later told one small mercy: the deaths would have been painless. The victims simply fell asleep and never woke up. The doctor was eventually charged with 15 murders. The trial began in October 1999. There were no eyewitnesses and no direct physical evidence tying him to the injections themselves. But the circumstantial evidence was overwhelming. Forged medical records, forged prescriptions, false emergency calls, pressure to avoid autopsies, attempts to cremate bodies quickly. After 6 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts. For the first time in British history, a doctor had been convicted of deliberately murdering his patients. He was sentenced to life in prison with no possibility of parole. A massive public inquiry followed, tasked with determining how many victims there really were and how the system had failed so badly. The conclusions were horrifying. The inquiry found that he had likely killed at least 218 people, possibly as many as 250 or more. At his peak, he was killing up to 7 patients a month. He was officially declared the most prolific serial killer in recorded history. In January 2004, before the final inquiry report was released, he was found hanged in his prison cell. His death brought little closure. Families were left with unanswered questions and the knowledge that their loved ones had trusted the very person who killed them. The case led to sweeping reforms in Britain's medical and death certification systems, but the damage had already been done.